Hello and welcome to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast, your source for news and Hoosier law, brought to you by Taft. I'm Alexa Shrake, Indiana Lawyer Reporter, and your host this week. As always, I'm here in our Monument Circle studio with Managing Editor Daniel Carson and reporter Maura Johnson to give you the rundown on the latest legal news. Plus, I chat with Shana Stump, the pre-law advisor at Indiana University-Indianapolis, about changes to the LSAT and undergraduate interest in law school. So, let's get started. Today is Wednesday, August 7th, 2024, and these are your headlines. To start, Maura, tell us about a recent Indiana Court of Appeals ruling about an IndyGo incident.
The Indiana Court of Appeals reversed a trial court's decision denying IndyGo's motion for a directed verdict after the transportation company was sued for the death of a man who was struck by a bus in 2018. 63-year-old Michael Rex Ferguson was struck by an IndyGo bus while trying to board at the Lafayette Square Mall bus stop on September 29, 2018. At the time, Ferguson had a dependence on alcohol, and earlier that day he was taken to the hospital after being found intoxicated on a sidewalk. Court records state he was still intoxicated when he was released from the hospital. An IndyGo bus, driven by David Ross, pulled up to the mall bus stop. Video at the stop showed Ferguson approach the front door of the bus, but did not reach it before the bus began to drive away a minute later. As it pulled away, Ferguson reached toward the door and made contact with it, causing him to get spun around and fall into the bus's path. He died on October 12th due to complications from blunt force trauma. Medical records show that when Ferguson was hit, his blood alcohol concentration was 3 times over the legal limit to drive. During a jury trial in April 2023, the only evidence presented concerning Ferguson's conduct was the video showing him move toward the bus. No eyewitnesses testified about his conduct before the incident. After the full presentation of evidence, IndyGo moved for a directed verdict under Trial Rule 50, which the trial court verbally denied. The jury later returned a verdict in favor of Ferguson's estate. After the verdict, IndyGo filed a motion to correct error, which the trial court denied and IndyGo appealed. In the opinion, Court of Appeals Judge Peter Foley said Ferguson was negligent, to some degree, when reaching toward the bus because he failed to act as a reasonable person, given his experience riding a bus. Judge Elaine Brown concurred, and Judge Patricia Riley dissented. In her dissent, Riley said IndyGo failed to show burden of proof by not providing sufficient evidence that Ferguson acted unreasonably when reaching his arm out to the bus. Riley wrote that Ferguson's actions didn't amount to negligence, but reflected a series of unfortunate events leading to his death.
Thanks, Maura. Sticking with the appellate court, it will be seeing more changes soon to its bench. Last year, Judges Dana Kenworthy and Paul Felix joined the court, and now there are 2 vacancies. The Indiana Judicial Nominating Commission held interviews and sent 3 finalists to Governor Eric Holcomb to pick from to fill Judge Patricia Riley's vacancy following her retirement. St. Joseph Superior Court Judge Stephanie E. Steele, Porter Superior Court Judge Mary DeBoer, and Lake Superior Court Judge Stephen E. Steele are the finalists to fill the vacancy and succeed, and one of them will succeed Riley. The commission has also opened applications for Judge Terry Crone's upcoming vacancy this fall. Candidates are required to be from the 3rd District, which covers northern Indiana. Applicants that applied for Riley's vacancy will also be considered. Applications are due by noon on September 12th. Going back to Maura, what can you tell us about a federal sentencing?
An Indianapolis drug dealer was sentenced to over 15 years in federal prison for trafficking fentanyl while serving on community corrections. 49-year-old Clifton Withers was sentenced after pleading guilty to 2 counts of possession with intent to distribute 40 grams or more of fentanyl and unlawful possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. In January 2020, Withers was sentenced and placed on home detention in Marion County after being convicted of dealing in a narcotic drug. While serving that sentence, he rented 2 storage units in Indianapolis. That May, officers conducted a court-authorized search of his storage units and found approximately 250 grams of fentanyl, several boxes of ammunition, and 9 firearms. They found more fentanyl and a handgun in his vehicle. Because of his status as a convicted felon, Withers cannot legally possess a firearm. He has 4 felony drug trafficking convictions dating back to 1997.
In southern Indiana, a jury recently reached a verdict in a child molesting case. Daniel, what can you tell us?
A Vanderburgh County jury found a man guilty of 2 counts of child molesting. The jury found Oscar Rex G. guilty of 2 counts of child molesting, a level 1 and level 4 felony. In July 2023, Holly's house conducted a forensic interview and uncovered the sexual abuse of an 8-year-old child. Holly's house forensic interviewers were able to determine from the victim's disclosure that G regularly sexually abused the child and used tape to keep the victim from screaming, according to the Vanderburgh County Prosecutor's Office. Throughout the investigation, G made comments about fleeing back to Guatemala. Prosecutor Diana Moores said that she thought G deserved the maximum prison sentence for his crimes. Sentencing in the case is scheduled for August 14th in Vanderburgh County Superior Court. Now, back to Alexa for news on the state attorney general's decision to dismiss a lawsuit it brought against the city of East Chicago.
Earlier this month, the Office of the Attorney General filed a lawsuit against the city of East Chicago for not complying with federal immigration laws. It has now voluntarily dismissed the lawsuit. The City of East Chicago Common Council and its mayor, Anthony Copeland, approved the decision to repeal its Welcoming City Ordinance. Indiana Attorney General stated that his office will be continuing with a similar lawsuit against Monroe County. The lawsuit was filed days after the one against the City of East Chicago over its immigration policy. The lawsuit is requesting that a trial court compel Monroe County to stop violating the state's ban on sanctuary cities. Moving back to Daniel, you have news on a lawsuit against Indiana University for its scholarships.
A group that touts itself as devoted to the fair treatment of all persons without regard to race or ethnicity has filed a civil rights complaint against Indiana University over what it describes as the university's offering of discriminatory scholarships. The Equal Protection Project filed the complaint, which is posted on its website, July 15th, with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights in Chicago. The 14-page complaint lists at least 19 race-based scholarships at the Kelley School of Business, the IU Indianapolis campus, and the McKinney School of Law. In the complaint, EPP argued that in Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus President and Fellows of Harvard College, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that, quote, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. The guarantee of equal protection cannot mean one thing when applied to one individual and something else when applied to a person of another color. If both are not accorded the same protection, then it is not equal, end quote. The complaint further alleges that since IU is a public institution, its creation, sponsorship, and promotion of discriminatory scholarships also violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. William A. Jacobson, president of Legal Insurrection Foundation and founder of EPP, told Indiana Lawyer his group received an anonymous tip that there was a pervasive discrimination problem at IU regarding scholarships, and filed the complaint because the scholarships are discriminatory on their face and because the number of discriminatory scholarships indicated a systemic disregard at IU for anti-discrimination laws and IU's own non-discrimination policies. Mark Bode, IU's executive director for media relations, said IU does not comment on individual complaints. Now, Alexa, what can you tell us about a new round of Lilly Endowment grants?
Lilly Endowment, Inc. approved $12.5 million in grants to 3 legal aid organizations in June to help strengthen their long-term financial stability. All 3 organizations provide an array of assistance to individuals from low-income households facing challenges in areas that include housing, employment, domestic violence, and family law, immigration, and reentry and following incarceration. The endowment issued a $2.5 million grant to Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. The grant provides funding for a multi-million-dollar endowment and sustainability projects, including enhancement to data systems, fundraising, strategic planning, board development, professional development, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and educational content. The clinic offers free legal services, education, and resources to disadvantaged individuals throughout the Hoosier State. The Indianapolis Legal Aid Society also received a $2.5 million grant from the endowment. The organization provides legal assistance in areas such as family law, housing, transportation, and employment. It handles approximately 8,000 cases annually. Indiana Legal Services, Inc. received the largest grant from the endowment of $7.5 million. The organization is Indiana's only statewide provider of civil legal aid services in areas of family law, immigration, and housing. With offices in Indianapolis and 7 other Indiana cities, it serves more than 15,000 individuals annually. And finally, to wrap up this week's headlines, Daniel, tell us about what you're working on for our next print issue.
I am working on a story for Indiana Lawyer's August 14th issue on a proposed Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rule for an industry known as earned wage access, which has been compared to payday lending. I will talk to Indiana attorneys and consumer advocates about the rule's potential impact in the state.
Okay, that'll do for this week's headlines. As always, if you want more legal news, check us out at theindianalawyer.com. Stick around after our sponsor break to hear my interview with Shana Stump.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
I have with me today Shana Stump, the pre-law advisor at Indiana University-Indianapolis. Shana has been with the university for 10 years, and prior to that, she was a business litigator with Faegre Baker Daniels, LLP. Shana graduated from Indiana University Maura School of Law and now works to help students prepare for law school. So to start, school is just around the corner for college students. So how are you feeling, Shana, about the new school year?
Well, school is just around the corner for professors too. So I think I share some fellow feeling with my students that there's some excitement because it's really fun to go back into the classroom with our students every August. But it's also a new schedule and everybody has to get used to it. And so usually I activate my sense of humor and my persistence at the beginning of August and just get ready to get to the middle of September. But I am excited. I'm excited. And one of the courses I'm teaching this fall is Introduction to Law and for undergraduates. And that's always one of the most fun courses to be in the classroom with undergraduate students because they're learning about the law for the first time. They have so many funny questions, insightful questions, curious questions. So I'm excited, but I also know that I have a big job ahead of me.
So what is it like, to have students that you've once been in their shoes?
That's an important question. I've been in my pre-law students' shoes in a couple of ways, and I try to bring that with me into an advising context. One of the ways is when I was an undergraduate, I did not know that I wanted to go to law school. So I definitely relate to students who are in a discernment process about majors and careers and postgraduate plans. So I can relate to that. I can also relate to, trying to figure out what law school is and what a legal career is going to look like. I did not go into law school thinking that I was going to have the career that I have had, and I have loved my career, but I didn't have any idea that it was even possible when I started. And so from those two places, not being sure that a legal career is what I was going to do, and, not having the legal career that I thought I was going to have in a great way, I try to bring that with me to all of my advising meetings with students who are interested in legal careers generally, and to be really authentic about, it's fine not to know what you're going to do. I didn't always know what I was going to do. What we are doing is building a foundation so that when the thing you want to do pops up in front of you, you can do it.
So I saw that you clerked for Justice Frank Sullivan Jr. when he was on the Indiana Supreme Court. What is it like now to be teaching in Indianapolis with him? Do you ever run into him on campus or anything like that?
I sure do. Justice Sullivan, who will always be Justice Sullivan to me, even though he's also Professor Sullivan now, is a faculty member at the McKinney School of Law. And I teach in the political science department in the School of Liberal Arts. But I love bringing him into the classroom to introduce my students to what it's like to be in a law school classroom. I sometimes have him come visit classes and do a bit of Socratic method with them and answer their questions about law school. I'll also say he is someone who, in my career, has been a great mentor and who has modeled at every stage, whether it was when he was a justice of the Indiana Supreme Court or a professor at the law school, the importance of mentoring students, bringing folks into the profession, making the profession seem attainable, and that those are values that I also try to implement in my teaching and my advising. And one of the places that I learned them was watching him. And so it is so fun to get to run into him as a colleague occasionally, but also I still think of him as someone who I go to if I have a question about my career or something like that. So it's really fun and a bit unbelievable to me to be his colleague.
That's excellent. So yeah, just, yesterday was August 1st, that's the new changes to the LSAT, happening this month. How has that changed what you advise students?
The changes to the LSAT. So there are two big changes that I'm looking at with students right now. One is the logic games section has been discontinued. And the other is that the writing sample the format of that has changed. Honestly, factually, the information that I give them has changed because I tell them that the LSAT has a slightly different format now than it did, a month ago. But in terms of advising substance, it doesn't change a lot of what I tell students who are curious about applying to law school, because I've always said, prepare for the LSAT. I've always said writing is at the center of a legal career. We need to be sure that we're ready for that. So I have changed the structure, I suppose, of what I tell them, but the spirit of it remains the same.
So nationally, this has been talked about, there's growing distrust in the judicial system. How do you see this affect prospective students?
I can't personally speak to national distrust of the judicial system. I'm not sure if that's true or not. What I see in my students is a real curiosity about how our systems work. I see students who are open to participation in a lot of different ways in the world around them. I am a real fan of today's recent high school graduates. I love teaching undergraduates. I find them curious and open, often quite funny. I love to talk to them about what they're thinking about. So what I see in terms of students interacting with the judicial system is a lot of them don't know a lot. And so they come to, especially introductory classes, with a lot of questions that are not loaded or charged at all. They just want to know how things work, or what is an appeal, and why did that happen, and what's this reasoning I keep hearing about. Let's learn more about that. So I try to engage students from that space also, to be open and curious and to listen to their questions and try to include what I hear them being interested in the nuts and bolts that every lawyer knows we need to talk about with undergraduates.
So yeah, what is, a common misconception that you see students have about the legal field?
I teach at IU Indianapolis, and I teach a lot of students who are the first in their families to go to college. Maybe they don't have lawyers in their families who are coaching them about what a legal career could be. So the common misconception I see is that students either think that they can't pursue a legal career or that they don't belong in the legal profession. And that's rarely true. And so one of the the really fun things about my job is getting to explain to students the concrete steps they can take to approach a legal career. And when I say legal career, I don't only mean lawyers. There are lots of ways to engage in a legal career. You don't have to go to law school, although many of them end up going. And so talking about the different ways that a legal career can happen, but also sharing examples of people who've gone to IU Indianapolis and gone on to do all sorts of things. I love showing students that their dreams are possible when it comes to professions related to law.
So, a lot of changes have happened in the legal field in the last few years alone. What changes do you see coming or that you're, keeping your eyes on?
I have a couple areas where I think about that. One of the things I do as part of my job is talk to various kinds of legal employers every couple of years about what they're seeing in the workplace and the skills that they would love to see recent graduates develop while they're undergraduates. And this past year, when I talked to employers, I added some questions about how COVID has changed their workplaces. I was curious to hear what they would say. And I heard very similar things from a lot of mostly lawyers, but some kind of other organizational professionals that talked about the ways that technology has made remote work easier and more accessible, but also how now that we're getting a few years out from 2020 and the shutdown, the importance of also bringing folks back into the workplace in person and trying to find a balance. And I've really been thinking about how to talk to students about the importance of using technology and being familiar with it and being able to be self-motivated in a remote setting, but also understanding that it's really important, especially early in your career, to also be open to those in-person interactions and to see what can grow out of them. So that's one area that I've heard employers talking about, the importance of finding a balance. And I think we're all still looking for it. I say that myself as a professional. The other area that I'm really keeping my eyes on is AI. And that's as both professor and as a lawyer. I see a lot of students, one of the areas of skill that I emphasize with my students, and I tell them no matter what they decide to do, if they don't go to law school, they still need to be good writers. And learning how to write can be hard, and it can feel grueling, and being a good editor is something that comes from being a good writer, and it just takes time. And I sometimes see students, especially recently, who are looking for a shortcut and will use AI. And I tell students that making sure you're a good writer before you start using AI as a tool, because it is a tool and it's an important tool that a lot of lawyers are already using and going to be using, but we need to be good writers first. And so that is something that I and many of my colleagues, I bet, I haven't polled them, but I bet a lot of my colleagues in the university would say something similar, that we're going to be using it, but let's make sure we have that foundation first.
How do you use AI in the classrooms at all, or, and if so, how?
So lawyers have always used forms of AI, right? Our legal search engines for research have always used forms of AI. Some of my colleagues have been doing interesting things with having AI generate something written and then looking at it with students to have thoughtful discussion about what AI is and what it isn't right now. And of course, it's always developing, and we have to keep watching what it can do. But right now, a lot of instruction is focused on educating students on what it can do and what it can't. For example, sometimes I've heard the word hallucination used for every once in a while a site will show up that just isn't anything. And there have been a couple high profile cases in the news of lawyers who made a mistake relying without site checking, which is all still important. So right now it's having thoughtful conversations with students about what they can do and what they shouldn't yet.
I think that covers most of everything. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
One thing I'd love to add is I talked about how one of the exciting and fun parts of my job is bringing students into the legal profession who might not realize that there's a place for them there. And I would just love to shout out to my fellow attorneys. I know that post-COVID, a lot of internship opportunities for law students have come back online. But please also remember that there are undergraduate students who are also eager to learn what it's like to work in an office and what it's like to do work for a lawyer or as a paralegal. And I love finding those kinds of opportunities for students because a lot of times they come back and they say, occasionally they'll say, I really didn't like this part of being a lawyer. Now I know I'm not going to do that, which I think is a really important part of being an intern. But often they'll come back and say, I had no idea that I was going to enjoy client services as much as I did, or research as much as I did, or putting together a factual timeline as much as I did. So if you have those kinds of opportunities, I would love to hear about them.
Do opportunities for undergraduates ever come up, like to shadow and stuff like that?
We sure do some of that. Sometimes students find that themselves, and that is great. Sometimes students know someone in their community who brings them to work for a day. Those opportunities are really important just to see the range of legal jobs that are out there. With a longer term internship, students have a chance to experience some more in-depth work and get a better sense of what is the hard work of being a lawyer or a paralegal, and then what is the fun, rewarding work of being a lawyer or a paralegal. With a more sustained experience, you get a bit more of a sense of both of those.
All right, that'll do for this week's interview. Shana, thank you again so much for joining me today. And to our listeners, head over to theindianalawyer.com to hear our past interviews. You can also find us on your favorite podcast apps. We'll talk to you soon.